Have you ever noticed how some conflicts in our world feel bigger than politics, bigger than borders, even bigger than human decisions? The war in the Middle East, and especially the struggle between Israel and its neighbors, often feels like one of those battles. It isn't just about land. It isn't just about power. For many, it feels like history itself is replaying, like an ancient script written thousands of years ago is unfolding in real time before our eyes. When we turn to biblical prophecy, things start to look different. Prophecy doesn't just describe future events, it reveals patterns, warnings, and truths that echo through centuries. And if we pay attention, those ancient words might help us make sense of why Israel's story seems to always sit at the very center of global tension. So let's dive into this together. In this video, we're going to unpack how prophecy, especially from books like Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, frames Israel's troubling times. And as we move forward, I want you to keep one question in mind. Is what we're watching on the news today simply politics, or is it prophecy being fulfilled right in front of us? Part 1. Why prophecy still matters today. Let's start with the basics. Why even talk about prophecy in the 21st century? Isn't it outdated? Some dusty thing buried in old scripture? Well, here's the thing. Prophecy has this strange power to outlive empires, cultures, even languages. Nations rise and fall, but the prophetic words about Israel have never really gone away. In fact, they keep resurfacing. Take the book of Ezekiel. Written over 2,500 years ago, it describes the scattering of Israel across the nations and then their eventual return. For centuries, people dismissed this as poetic metaphor. But in 1948, Israel literally became a nation again after almost 2 millennia of exile. That's not just history, it's prophecy intersecting with headlines. And that's where things start to get eerie. Because if the first half of a prophecy came true in such detail, doesn't that force us to at least consider that the second half might come true as well? Real life story to connect. I remember talking to an older man in my neighborhood, a Holocaust survivor who immigrated to Israel in 1949. He told me something that stuck with me forever. He said, "I was born in a world where people told us we had no home, no future. And then within 1 year, we were suddenly back in the land of our ancestors. You can call it politics, I call it prophecy." That personal story brings prophecy out of the clouds. It reminds us that prophecy isn't just abstract, it shapes real lives, real families, real nations. But why Israel? Why does such a small piece of land matter so much? If you look at a map, Israel is tiny compared to the massive countries around it. Yet every time conflict breaks out in the Middle East, the world's eyes turn to Jerusalem. From a prophetic perspective, this isn't random. The Bible consistently frames Israel as a stage on which humanity's greatest struggles, spiritual and political, will be played out. Jerusalem, in particular, is described as a cup of trembling for the nations. Think about that image, a cup of trembling. It suggests instability, unrest, something everyone wants to drink from, but no one can handle. And when we look at modern events, the wars, the peace treaties, the endless negotiations, we see how true that is. Every leader who tries to solve the conflict eventually realizes they're dealing with something much bigger than politics. Here's my take. Prophecy gives us a lens to see beyond the headlines. Without that lens, the conflict just looks like one more endless human struggle. With it, we start to notice patterns. The return of the Jewish people to their land, the growing hostility from surrounding nations, the fragile alliances and sudden betrayals. These aren't random. They match prophetic outlines that have been studied for centuries. Now, I'm not saying every headline is a direct fulfillment of prophecy. That kind of thinking can be dangerous and oversimplified. But I am saying that prophecy provides a framework, And that framework helps us understand why Israel's story feels so weighty, so significant compared to other global conflicts. And let's not forget, behind the prophecies and the politics are real people. Families in Israel and Palestine who live with constant fear. Parents who send their kids to school not knowing if the day will end in safety. Soldiers who believe they're protecting their homeland. Refugees who wonder if they'll ever see peace in their lifetime. Sometimes when we talk about prophecy, we get so caught up in the big picture that we lose sight of the human heart. But prophecy was never just about predicting events. It was about calling people back to God, back to justice, back to compassion. And maybe that's a lesson for us right now. Whether or not we are living in the end times, we're definitely living in our times, times where fear and division are rampant. And maybe the call of prophecy is to remember the human heart, even while we keep an eye on the bigger picture. So in this part, we've looked at why prophecy matters and how it frames Israel's unique place in world history. We've seen how ancient texts continue to shape modern events, and how Israel remains a kind of prophetic stage for the entire world. But this is just the beginning, because the Bible doesn't just say why Israel is central. It also lays out what's coming next. In part 2, we're going to look closely at some of the most unsettling and mysterious prophecies. Prophecies about wars, alliances, and a period called the Great Tribulation. And we'll ask, are we closer to that reality than we think? Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more the pieces of this prophetic puzzle begin to fit together.
In part 1, we explored why prophecy still matters today and how Israel's very existence sits at the heart of it all. We saw how the return of the Jewish people to their land mirrored ancient words written thousands of years ago. But prophecy doesn't stop there. It pushes us forward. It dares to describe wars that have yet to happen, alliances that will shake the world, and a period of history so dark that Jesus himself called it the Great Tribulation. So in this part, let's lean in and ask the harder question: are we on the brink of these troubling times? The prophecy of wars, Ezekiel 38 and 39. One of the most talked about prophecies in modern times comes from Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. It describes a coalition of nations that rise against Israel in the latter days. Among them are names like Gog, Magog, Persia, Cush, and Put. Scholars have debated for centuries who these nations represent in today's geography, but many agree that it points towards alliances stretching across the Middle East, North Africa, and even powers from the north. What's chilling is how Ezekiel describes this coalition: massive armies gathering against a relatively small nation, Israel, which lives securely in its land. And yet God intervenes, not Israel's military, not the United Nations, but divine intervention itself. Now, whether you take this prophecy literally or symbolically, it carries a sobering weight. It paints a picture of Israel surrounded, vulnerable, and yet somehow preserved against all odds. Modern analysis and parallels. Think about the headlines over the last decades: Iran's growing influence in the Middle East, shifting alliances between Russia, Turkey, and regional powers, the constant tension over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Every one of these elements feels like puzzle pieces that could fit into Ezekiel's prophecy. It's almost like watching the stage being slowly set for a drama that's much larger than us. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying Ezekiel 38 will happen tomorrow, or that every political move is a direct fulfillment. That's oversimplified. But ignoring these parallels would also be foolish. Prophecy teaches us to stay awake, to pay attention, and not to be lulled into thinking history is just random. Real-life story, a war survivor's perspective. I once read the story of an Israeli woman who lived through the Yom Kippur War of 1973. She described waking up to sirens, rushing her children into a shelter, and hearing bombs fall nearby. She said, "At that moment, I felt our nation could disappear in a single day, but somehow we survived." Her words echo Isaiah 66:8, which says, "Can a country be born in a day?" Yes, Israel was reborn in a single day in 1948. But her testimony also reminds us Israel has come close to destruction many times, and each time, against all odds, it remains. For her, survival wasn't just luck, it was part of a bigger story. The Great Tribulation, a time like no other. Now, let's talk about something even more unsettling, the Great Tribulation. Jesus himself warned about it in Matthew 24. He said it would be a time of distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. That's heavy. It means no war in history, no pandemic, no empire collapse will compare to what's coming. Prophecy suggests that Israel will once again be at the center of this period. Daniel speaks of a figure who will rise and make a covenant with Israel, only to betray it halfway through. Many call this figure the Antichrist. And Revelation describes global upheaval, wars, famine, persecution that will shake every nation. What's important to notice is that the conflict isn't just political, it's spiritual. The tribulation isn't about one country against another, it's about humanity against God's truth. And Israel is right in the middle of that storm. Commentary. Why this matters for us today. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but why should I care? Why should I lose sleep over prophecies of wars and tribulation? Here's my take. Prophecy isn't meant to make us paranoid. It's meant to make us prepared. It's a wake-up call. Think of it like weather alerts. If a storm is coming, people don't panic, they prepare. They check their homes, gather supplies, make sure loved ones are safe. Prophecy works the same way. It warns us that storms, spiritual and global, are coming, not to terrify us, but to get us ready. And part of that preparation isn't just stocking up on resources. It's strengthening our faith, deepening our compassion, and refusing to let fear dictate our choices. Emotional anchor, the human struggle. One of the hardest truths about prophecy is that it doesn't sugarcoat the future. The Bible is brutally honest. Suffering is coming. Families will be torn apart, nations will rage, and people will be tested. But here's the flip side. It also promises hope. Jesus said, "When these things begin to happen, lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." That means prophecy doesn't just point to destruction, it points to deliverance. I think about this when I see footage of families in Gaza, or soldiers in Israel, or refugees fleeing war zones. Prophecy doesn't erase their suffering, but it does remind us there's an ultimate end to suffering. That history is not spinning out of control, it's moving towards a destination. So far, we've seen how prophecy outlines wars and alliances, and how it describes the Great Tribulation, a period not just of conflict, but of absolute turmoil. But here's the question we need to wrestle with. If prophecy points to troubling times, what does that mean for us today? How do we live differently in light of it? That's what we'll explore in Part 3, the practical side of prophecy. We'll talk about what it means to stay awake, how to balance faith with wisdom, and most importantly, what lesson we can personally take away from all this. Because prophecy was never just meant to inform us, it was meant to transform us. Stay with me, because the final part might be the most important of all.
We've journeyed through prophecy together. In Part 1, we laid the foundation, Israel's survival and restoration as a prophetic sign. In Part 2, we looked at the sobering prophecies of wars, alliances, and the Great Tribulation. Now comes the most important part. What does all of this mean for us?
because prophecy isn't meant to stay on dusty scrolls or in academic debates. It's meant to shape how we live right now. Lesson 1. Staying awake in a world that numbs us. One of Jesus' clearest commands in Matthew 24 was this: "Stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming." That's not just about the end of the world. It's about the danger of falling asleep spiritually. Let's be real. Life today is noisy. Notifications, deadlines, bills, streaming shows. It's easy to drift into autopilot. But prophecy shakes us awake. It says, history isn't random. Pay attention. The story is bigger than you think. Think about it. So many people go through life chasing trends, wealth, or comfort, only to realize they've missed the deeper story. Prophecy warns us against that sleepwalking. Real-life story. The 9/11 wake-up call. I remember reading about a man who worked in one of the World Trade Center towers during 9/11. He said he used to complain about the small things: traffic jams, slow coffee lines, endless meetings. But after barely escaping that day, his perspective completely changed. He said, "I realized life is fragile, and I was living asleep. From then on, every day felt like a gift." That's what prophecy is supposed to do. It wakes us up before tragedy strikes. It reminds us that the clock is ticking and wasting life on trivial things isn't worth it. Lesson 2. Preparing without panicking. Here's the tricky balance. Prophecy calls us to prepare, but not to panic. Some people hear about wars, famines, or the Antichrist and immediately spiral into fear. They hoard supplies, isolate themselves, or spend their lives predicting dates. But Jesus didn't tell us to panic. He told us to trust. Preparation looks less like building bunkers and more like building character. It's about strengthening your faith, your family, your community. Think of it like training for a marathon. You don't obsess over the finish line every day. You focus on staying healthy, consistent, and disciplined. That way, when the big day comes, you're ready. Commentary. Faith as our anchor. If prophecy is the storm, faith is the anchor. Without faith, every headline feels terrifying. But with faith, we see the storm differently. We don't deny its power, but we trust the one who calms it. In fact, I'd argue that the whole point of prophecy isn't to scare us about the Antichrist. It's to reassure us about Christ. He's the center. He's the hope. Lesson 3. Compassion in troubling times. Here's something we often overlook. Prophecy isn't just about survival. It's about compassion. When Jesus described the end times in Matthew 24 and 25, he immediately followed it with a teaching on compassion. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the sick and imprisoned. That tells us something. In times of crisis, the true mark of faith isn't how much we know, it's how much we love. Think about refugee families fleeing war zones. Think about ordinary people trapped in conflicts they didn't choose. If prophecy reminds us of anything, it's that suffering is real, and our response should be empathy, not indifference. Real-life story. The power of small acts. During World War II, there was a Dutch Christian woman named Corrie ten Boom. She and her family hid Jews in their home to protect them from the Nazis. Eventually, they were caught, and Corrie was sent to a concentration camp. But even in that darkest place, she lived out her faith. She smuggled in a Bible, shared it secretly with others, and offered hope when everything around her was hopeless. Her story reminds us that prophecy isn't just about grand predictions. It's about ordinary people choosing courage and compassion in extraordinary times. Lesson 4. Hope beyond the headlines. Let's be honest, it's easy to feel hopeless when you scroll through the news. Wars, corruption,
climate disasters. It feels like the world is unraveling. But prophecy tells us the unraveling isn't the end of the story. It points us toward hope. The Bible promises a future where swords will be beaten into plowshares, where tears will be wiped away, where justice will roll down like waters. That hope doesn't erase today's pain, but it reframes it. It tells us that even when history feels chaotic, there's a hand guiding it toward redemption. So, what's the big lesson from all of this? Here's mine. Live with urgency, but also with grace. Urgency means realizing life is short, the times are serious, and faith matters. Grace means not letting fear harden us, but letting love guide us. Prophecy calls us to hold both at the same time. I think of it like this. If the world is truly on the brink of troubling times, then every conversation matters. Every act of kindness matters. Every choice of integrity matters. So let's recap. Prophecy shows us that Israel's survival is no accident. That wars and alliances remind us history is unfolding with purpose. That the Great Tribulation warns of suffering, but also of deliverance. And that our response should be to stay awake, prepare with faith, show compassion, and cling to hope. At the end of the day, prophecy isn't just about Israel's story. It's about ours. It asks, how will you live knowing history has a destination? So as you log off tonight, remember this. Troubling times may come, but you were never meant to face them with fear. You were meant to face them with faith, courage, and love. Because if prophecy tells us anything, it's that history ends not in despair, but in redemption.